Good afternoon. Welcome to SCA's webinar with Decision Framing for Project Management, Building Quality Field Development Plans with Ellen Coopersmith. Before we start today's webinar, we'd like to ask a few questions about the demographics of the audience. So I'm going to launch some polling questions. And the first question is, what is your primary discipline? We're starting to get some responses now. Looks like we have petroleum engineers and geoscientists in this audience. Answers are still coming in as people are joining the webinar. Looks like most of you have voted at this point, so I'll go ahead and close this poll and share the results. We have 40% petroleum engineers, 60% geoscientists. So for the next polling question, how many years of full-time experience do you have in the upstream oil and gas industry? We're receiving responses now. Looks like we have some people in almost every category. The responses are still coming in. I'll go ahead and close this now. For those of you who have voted, we have 40% with over 30 years experience and a good representation in each of the other categories. Then we have one more polling question. How familiar are you with decision or opportunity framing for field development planning? So this question is very specific to today's topic. So we're starting to receive some responses now. Looks like most of you are in the middle category. Responses are still coming in. Well, for those of you who have voted, I'll go ahead and close and share these responses. We don't have anyone who's very familiar. We have about 60% of you who are familiar with project framing. 20% are aware and 20% are not familiar or unaware. So thanks for sharing that information. And I'm going to put my slides into show mode here and make some introductory comments. And before
display, don't forget to, there you go. Thank you.
Okay. Before I introduce Ellen, I'd like to remind the audience that you are muted and that you can ask questions during the presentation using the GoToWebinar question feature. We'll cover the Q&A at the end of the presentation and you will be anonymous. So today's webinar is on decision framing for project management, building quality field development plans. Ellen Coopersmith is our speaker today. Decision framing for project management, building quality field development plans. And Ellen is the founder of Decision Frameworks, and she's been with the company since its inception in 1999. She's a graduate of the Colorado School of Mines and Petroleum Engineering, and she specializes in decision analysis. Prior to forming Decision Frameworks, she was leading decision and risk analysis at Conoco. Ellen is a published author and invited speaker on a number of topics related to decision analysis. She has served as the president of the Society of Decision Professionals. One of the classes that Ellen teaches for SCA is Introduction to Decision Framing for Project Management. This one-day class will be offered in Houston in January, and it gives you a chance to really get into the details of the workflow of decision framing. And for engineers, geoscientists, and project managers, this is a great course to establish your credentials. We have a second course that is scheduled in February, a one-day course as well. This is a value of information course. And if you've heard your colleagues talking about VOI exercises, this is an opportunity to learn more how to establish the value of information. Again, this course is one day. It'll be offered in Houston, Texas in February. We have another webinar that Ellen will be delivering in November that relates more to this VOI course, and it's called the VOI Min Kit, Justifying Information, and it's tied to future decisions it impacts. There are a number of courses that are offered in SCA's office in Houston over the next few weeks, as well as one course that's offered in Kuala Lumpur. You can see we have applied seismic interpretation, mapping seismic data, best practices for new well fracs and legacy well recompletions, and then two offerings of applied subsurface geological mapping, one in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and the other in Houston, Texas. In addition, we have a number of courses that are coming in the October, November, December timeframe that are all in person. Seismic stratigraphy in deep water settings, artificial neural systems, fiber optic sensing, geothermal energy, energy transition, CCUS from an engineering perspective, unconventional resource plays, cement repair workshop, and pore pressure, fracture pressure, and wellbore stability. Look to our website for more details on how to register for these classes. Classes can be taught at your location if you prefer. These can be offered privately in-house, or you can host a public class. The public classes can be offered in our office or other locations. And we also offer some of our classes in live online format, which may be good if you have students that are in different locations. In addition to training, SCA provides consulting and recruiting, so look to us for all of those needs. I'm going to give the presentation rights to Ellen and let her launch the webinar.
Okay.
And
so,
Ellen, I'm going to turn my camera off and you are on.
okay.
You're good to go.
And the screen is showing.
Looks great.
Okay. Well, welcome. And I'm very excited to be a part of SCA's kind of portfolio of courses, especially for technical people. And I hope you'll enjoy this. It's as a petroleum engineer, as a reservoir engineer, and then learning decision analysis, decision risk analysis. I find this a great tool for those of us from technical backgrounds working in the industry. So this one is around decision framing for project management, building quality field development plans. Really, I'm teaching you how to do decision framing on small or big, but we're going to look at field development plans as the case example because a lot of you and a lot of us are part of these opportunity framings and stage gate decision-making processes that utilize and can utilize framing. But in your heads, I hope you keep the idea that this is really to frame decisions big and small. You may not use all the steps I'm going to show, but hopefully you can see how it's just a great tool for those of us on the technical side. Alrighty, so we did our introductions. I'll do some quick introductions. I'll talk a tiny bit around decision quality and decision framing. Our focus is on the framing, what you and I knew years ago to be decision analysis. The N word is really decision quality because it isn't just about the analytics. It's not just about incorporating the risk and uncertainty. And then we're going to focus on framing because it's really one of the most powerful things anybody can do. And then I have a field development plan example from the energy transition, field development plan, developing your field during the energy transition and how some of those steps would be specific to energy transition. And then I thought I'd end with just some different examples of field development frames from different types of assets, different types of fields. So we're going to get going here. Alrighty, I saw that some of you are familiar with framing, and so I'll go into that in a second. As Susan kindly introduced me, I am a petroleum engineer by degree, and years ago, I, for no apparent reason, was given the job of helping Conoco implement what they called at the time decision risk analysis. What I really saw was that I have a passion for it, and anybody can do it. I don't have a degree in this. You guys don't have a degree in it. And really, this thing that we call decision quality and decision framing is just it's like taking another class that we would have in our curriculum and applying it to the types of decisions we support in the organization. So in '99, I started Decision Frameworks. It is an enablement firm. Our goal is really to help you guys apply decision analysis and decision quality principles as you see fit in your organization, whether it's to look at getting information and maturing your assets, or whether it's developing your fields or late life decision making as well. So we do coaching and consulting. We do have tools that can help companies be independent. And we have a lot of different case-based training. So you guys are going to get a glimpse of the different case examples that we use in our courses and with our teams. Alrighty, so what is this weird thing we now call decision quality? It's really, it's got some steps. It does have tools. It doesn't mean you need to use all the steps and tools, but it's really a collaborative framework to help teams arrive at what they might want to be recommending and why. So it has a define, a frame, an evaluate, and a decide component where you're touching points with decision makers at key aspects of it. But if we throw all that aside, what it really is, and you guys know this, I believe, it's really around value-focused decision making. And it gets down to not any kind of a process, but a thought. And it's really, what decision do we need to make? What do we value for that particular decision? What are the important considerations for that particular decision? What are our options and how do they compare? And that's really all decision analysis and decision quality is, and how much approach and tools you use should scale and vary. Alrighty, so last little bit on just decision quality. You can see an expansion of the define, the frame, the evaluate, and the decide if you were to do more of the full Monty of the steps. But the important part is we're really helping ourselves and our teams be in service to enabling our decision makers to make informed decisions. So you're going to see that the define, really the team will help define the problem, but the decision makers need to own it. What is the decision they need us to make? What's in and out of scope? What are the things they're going to value and consider? What questions do they have to answer? The team has the relevant knowledge. And really, it's the team's job to frame up the options and what risks and uncertainties those options may face. And that's what, if any of you have participated in a framing workshop, that's really what the workshop would be about. And that could be anything from a half a day to a few days or a few sessions, let's call it, to frame up those options and understand the landscape. It's the team's job to evaluate those options in an appropriate way, to bring those options and how they compare to the decision maker who ultimately is going to decide. The team may make, and you guys are probably involved with making recommendations, but ultimately the final trade-offs is the decision maker's kind of priority. Alrighty, so now let's talk about framing field development plans. And the way I think of framing is it's really just taking a room full of issues and making sense of it, to lay things out and come up with what the options are, about what they want to do, and then set up, we say the frame is in service to the evaluation. So the purpose of the frame is to lay out the options, and given the options cannot be decided upon after the framing, then it's really in service to setting up the appropriate evaluation of some of the options that are of interest. Okay, so we're going to look at an energy transition case example. This is the basic, what we would call standard decision framing and analysis workflow. And this workshop, we're just going to show an example of each as we walk through it. But this webinar, not a workshop, is really emphasizing the define and frame because it's in service to the evaluate and decide, and that's not what we're going to focus on. I also see framing as something anybody can do. Alrighty, so in our predefined case, as we call it, the situation is we have a sizable acreage with an appraised gas discovery and other opportunities in the area. In this particular situation, it is in an area where there's a lot of geopolitical stuff going on with respect to the energy transition. So they have environmental and social and government initiatives that are just kind of permeating the business landscape, and yet we have a field that we have to decide what we want to do with. There is a focus on sustainability goals and CO2 reduction, as many of us are living through right now. Concerns are regarding development concept, given different implications of how the energy transition and any support that we may get for where this field is from the government with respect to carbon policy. Alrighty, so that's the situation. So the first step is really figuring out what is the decision we need to make, and we like to call that the define. So that is our define phase. And it really is where either you draft this based on your thoughts around it, or you sit down with a decision maker, and we're really trying to say, what is the problem we're trying to solve? What is the opportunity we're trying to solve? So we like, over my many years of doing this now, I like a one-page, we call it problem definition. And it has 5 elements, always. And I like it because you can show it and use it with your team, with your decision makers, and as the decision evaluation evolves. So it's, and we expect it to change some as you get more information. Alrighty, so the first element is, what is the decision problem statement? Needs to have a decision in there. What is the best development plan for our recent Romeo discovery? We decided this was in Europe. The next part is, why do we need to make a decision at this time? Why is it important that we're working at this time? So the company has made a gas discovery in this Verona Sea. The discovery will be developed, but management has concerns around the energy transition environment. Historically, CCS policy has not been aggressive, but CCS projects have not been economically feasible. So we're all living this right now, but this could change in the coming years depending on policy evolution. So that's kind of the background, and that's why they need to make a decision. Then it comes to, what are the measures and metrics management is going to want to see, and you have to be able to discuss on how your options are going to compare. So here they're going to look at financial metrics, no big surprise, greenhouse gas emissions, stakeholder relationships with both regulators and the nearby NGOs, and public perception. So this is kind of eyes wide open. When we're having a conversation around what you're recommending, what do we want you to be, the team to be able to comment on? The next is really kind of the scope. So what are the givens or decisions made which set the problem scope? And this is important for the team to know when they're framing up options, what's in and out. So they will just, we will be developing the discovery. We will honor sustainability goals. We are willing to consider carbon reduction technologies, so they're not ruling those out. We will submit a field development plan for second quarter of next year, and we will meet regulatory targets. So those are the decisions that have been made, the team needs to be aware of. Very important in this problem definition is this last element, the 5th element, and that is, what are the key questions management needs answered by the team in order to make this decision? So they really are trying to understand, should we focus on only the Romeo discovery or build for growth potential? How will carbon policy decisions impact value? How should we mitigate greenhouse gas emissions? And how should we respond to evolving regulatory changes? So it is the team's job to frame up the options, and hopefully through the frame and or the evaluation, answer management's key questions. Why? Humans make decisions once their questions are answered. So we're trying to kind of summarize it. Anyhow, I love this one pager, and welcome to take it and put it in your own company kind of slide PowerPoint look. Alrighty, so the next step is, we know what decision we need to make and what the decision maker's perspective. Really, this is where you and the team would get together. You'd have some grounding presentations So everybody is fully grounded in the knowledge, and then you're going to have them brainstorm. What are all the issues and concerns associated with making that decision? So this is the important part of the team's relevant knowledge, okay? And so they're going to end up with a brainstorm, whether you did your brainstorm in an online platform or in a tool. And one of the most powerful aspects of framing, whether you're doing it on something big or small, is separating all of the issues, anything of concern around the decision, into facts, decisions, uncertainties, and values and objectives. So when I get a long email story, I just dump it and I categorize it. So decisions are within the company's control. Facts are outside of the control, but the team could tell us the actual outcome before the decision has to be made. Uncertainties are outside of the team's control, but the outcomes will not be known before we have to make a decision. You will ride into the decision not knowing the outcome. And values and objectives are those things and metrics, qualitative and quantitative, the management is going to consider when making the decision. So that was that little box of values. But super powerful, no matter what kind of decisions you support, to get used to kind of separating this is what we call the anatomy of the decision. Alrighty, from there, the next thing is decisions are the most important or are very important. So when we look back here, we have facts, decisions, uncertainties, and values. Values are how we're going to choose. Values are going to be how we compare the options, but decisions are special. Why? They are within your control. So those are your levers. So the next step of framing is going, okay, of all the decisions, which is in the company's control, let's look at our dashboard. Which decisions have been made? What are we focusing on to solve this problem? And what are later? So the decision hierarchy is really categorizing your decisions. So you'll take everything that was in the company's control and say, okay, these are decisions made. We're going to honor them. They're made for now. Or there's the decisions we're debating. What should we do to solve the problem of what to do with this Romeo discovery? We call those focus decisions. And then there's tactics. Tactical decisions are the next phase. They usually are dependent on the focus decisions. When you guys are framing, you're hunting given decisions, decisions made, and you're hunting focus decisions. But tactics kind of come up in the brainstorm, so you've got a place to put them. Okay, so so the decision hierarchy only has decisions within the company's control. And here's what it looks like for the Romeo. You can see what they're debating. So a lot of those were the key questions around, should they just focus on the discovery or should they focus others? How do they want to develop the gas, etc. Once we have the focus decisions, it lends ourselves into coming up with the different options, because this is what we are debating. This is what the team is debating. So you don't have to use a strategy table. It is an optional step. Having everything else at a very light level for smaller decisions, I would say, is your min kit. A strategy table is useful for especially field development planning, appraisal planning, because there's lots of different decisions you're debating. So we're going to look at how do you use a strategy table, which is really a menu of options developed from your focus decisions. So here you see we've got our focus decisions, and each of those types of decisions are column headings. So I look at this as if you're going to a restaurant and you were going to order a menu. You would have appetizer, main course, dessert, etc. This is your focus decisions laying out the options. And so there is no magic to it. It is a means for the team to put together different plans, right? We're looking at field development plans. So they're going to debate the acreage. What do they focus on? Because there's some other prospects in the area. They're going to look at the development concept in this case. They are going to decide, because of energy transition, what kind of end product do they want to monetize of the gas discovery. They are going to discuss power generation sources. Again, this is very much related to the energy transition location where they are going to be developing their field. And then they are debating, depending on how carbon policy might go and how much support they might get, it looks like they're debating carbon mitigation. So they're looking at what do they want to do with their emissions. They're not going to be able to, we don't flare, none of us anymore. And then CO2 storage. Okay, so they have built a menu of options from their focus decisions. From that, we need to come up with different approaches. So we call a strategy a coordinated set of decisions, and that's what we're going to use that strategy table for, or your field development concept plans, the alternate plans for. The goal is really to come up with some initial concepts that are very different, and we want them to be DIVAs, distinct, interesting, viable alternative strategies they're really debating. So this team is going to look at a go big strategy where they exploit all of those resources, not just the discovery. And the rationale, why it might be reasonable, well, that one might be good given they have high gas prices and if there is favorable carbon policy. Okay, then they're going to look at another DIVA here is big gas strategy. They're just going to monetize their gas production, and that should be good for favorable gas prices. So each of these different approaches has kind of a main approach and a rationale why it might be viable. The team can frame many, M-A-N-Y, and then we're going to discuss and screen and decide which few would we actually want to put more rigor and numbers to potentially. They're going to look at the green strategy, it looks like, where if the carbon initiative was very supportive, they might be able to actually grow that business. And they're going to look at kind of a minimal development strategy, only because we have a very unusual and volatile environment. We don't know how much support we're going to get. Alrighty, so in this case, the team happened to think through as they were developing their alternatives. They're thinking through what's gas price going to do and what's carbon regulation and policy support going to do. Teams will think of different approaches to do the field development. And the framing is a safe place. There's no huge commitment to huge rigor in the evaluation. It's getting everybody thinking. Alrighty, so how do we use that menu? Well, we use the menu by coming up with a different approach and the team discussing what decisions, because the strategy table is all the focus decisions, what decisions they would make if we were looking at a go big strategy where we want to fully exploit the resource. Well, they're going to try to pull in the Romeo discovery. They would explore the other prospects near there. In the case of good discovery outcomes, they're going to look at a standalone with extra ullage for the future discoveries. The end product here is traditional carbon gas, hydrocarbon gas. Power generation, they're talking about installing gas turbines offshore. CO2 emissions here, they're looking at minimal compliance on current regulations, and they're not going to put storage into that particular field development plan. So if the economics were going to be run, this is laying out what you would go cost out and what you would go and get your cost and your production profiles to support in the economic evaluation. Using the strategy table, you see every strategy here has a different color. And so ultimately, they have looked at defining 4 different alternative, very different field development plans, okay? So at this point, they understand the decision they need to make. They understand the metrics that are going to be looked at should they take them to evaluation. They have put together some very different viable field development plans, and the economics could go be run given the uncertainty in gas price and maybe discovery outcomes, resource size and costs, and some carbon policy differences to see how these options would compare. Remember, we said the frame is in service to the evaluation. Alrighty, so with different alternatives, then I'm gonna jump past another structuring step, which sometimes we do. These are optional, called a decision risk timeline. I think at the end, when I'm showing you some different field development plans for different types fields, I have one that has the decision risk timeline in it. What you will see the way we teach it and how I've kind of evolved this whole idea of decision analysis and decision quality framing is I like a qualitative assessment as the end of the framing workshop or framing session with the team, because it is quick and it gives you some insight, and they can frame many options, and then they can decide which few they really think are viable and worthy of the effort that would go into the evaluation. Okay, so we're going to go look at so we've inserted qualitative assessment into our framing workflow, and I highly recommend it, even for small stuff. We're not going to go through an influence diagram, but really this last step of framing is helping set up the economic evaluation of the alternatives in the evaluate and decide. And it's an optional step that is done sometime and super helpful, especially in energy transition evaluations, where we have different carbon policy support and regulations that need to come into our economic evaluation, and it can help us identify and bring those in our models appropriately. All right, so let's go look at a qualitative assessment. It's a traffic light report. And here, if you remember, in this particular one, the team is really framing, they're gonna go run hard metrics, NPV and PI and all those wonderful things, but there's some different kind of business case scenarios that would greatly improve or hurt or hinder our economics of our field development plan. So this team has their 4 strategy alternatives, their 4 field development plan alternatives on the left column, and they've used a red, yellow, green traffic light to have a discussion of how well these different concepts would fare, given we have high gas price and favorable carbon policy, given we have high gas price and restrictive regulations, given we have low gas price and a very restrictive regulatory situation, or low gas price and favorable regs. You could also do this against some other qualitative measures that you wouldn't have to go run economics yet. So kind of upfront CapEx and relative risk associated when you're making your field development plan versus your resource knowledge. Okay, so what we see here is if we go big, okay, it's great if we have gas prices high, if that's how it ends up being over time in the policy. We see the big gas strategy for World 2 here is probably good in multiple worlds and or multiple business landscapes, I should say, and isn't as and is good unless we just end low gas price and super unsupportive carbon policy. Go green strategy is kind of, I think that's the one that's got more to do with what we're doing with our CO2. And then we have the hands tied strategy. At this point, the team's going to have some insight and decide, do we want to go and talk to the decision makers and decide, can they make a decision? Likely not. And if so, if not, what are the right different field development plans that they're interested in for the team to then go and spend the time, energy, and effort to forecast your costs, forecast your resource, and build your economic business cases for them. So this would be a nice way to end our frame and go have a frame review and decide what evaluation is appropriate and the timeline and schedule to that. Alrighty, so those are kind of the basic framing steps. I hope that you guys see how to do it. And at this point, I thought it would be interesting to say, we looked at an energy transition field development and an energy transition for an offshore gas. Let's look just at a few others. Now, I did want to mention that even though we hear the word kind of opportunity framing, really there's upstream decision framings and evaluations are going on throughout your stage gates. And that's where I think some of you who are aware of it or have participated are usually coming in. So stage 1 is kind of like these path to value framings and opportunity framing stage, preliminary concept framing. When you guys are in your stage gate 2, that a lot of the companies are putting 2A, stage 2A and 2B, but you'll see final concept framings, develop to produce stage, concept elements. So even though we're seeing a big field development frame, we'll see a lot of small mini ones like well design, transportation options, where they're just going to frame up those options and evaluate those options, feed it back to the field development plan folks. Okay, and then you've got some stage B kind of stuff going on, gate 2B, and then we are seeing a lot of framing just on simpler decisions around the execution and implementation, partner strategy, contractor strategy, monitoring strategy in our field development. Those are going to be stage 3 to 5 smaller decision framings, often not always going to evaluations, or certainly maybe not going all the time to uncertainty evaluation. Alrighty, so to get your heads around how do these different stages work, I've got an example that, when your team or you guys are helping your team frame up stage 1, you're going to have givens, you're going to have focused decisions, you're going to develop alternatives, and you're probably going to do some evaluations. Then you're going to see something's viable and you're moving to stage 2, concept framing. And if you notice here, what was focused decisions in stage 1 got decided. We're not going to do this, we are going to do that. And you kind of screened out some options and they become givens for stage 2. So you've got new things you're focusing on. Now it's given we know we're going to do an offshore concept and a standalone, what are the different things we could do? Same thing happens in stage 3 and 4. Once your team and you make decisions around stage gate 2 concept, then there's going to be these little mini framings that are going on where everything what was decided in stage 2 becomes givens or decisions already made that we're going to honor in stages 3 through 5. So hopefully that kind of brings all that together for you. Okay, well, before I end, I'm going to show you just a few strategy table menus for different types of fields that you all probably support. Okay, so this is an LNG, field development plan, strategy table, and you can see the decisions they're debating in their menu are different. How much gas is going to domestic market? How much gas is going to go, what kind of concept? Are we doing onshore? Are we doing offshore LNG? Are we doing compressed gas? Are we doing pipeline? We have an international gas sales market. Which regions are we going to send them? So these are the typical strategy table or a typical strategy table for an LNG field development framing that you could do. They're looking at gas sales and structure, etc. Alrighty, here is one for an unconventional. I know a lot of you support, and we all support unconventional field development planning. Completely different types of decisions, very much around the mechanics of how they want to set it up. Often they will look at different pilots. Do they want to do any piloting before they choose? Well spacing, lateral length, sometimes the pace that they're going to plow through their field development, and then what kind of facility infrastructure decision do they want to make? Are they going to have it dispersed or kind of central? Another one we're looking for is late life. We're doing a lot, especially nowadays in our industry, there's a lot of late life asset field development planning or field planning. And you can see completely different decisions. So they're doing cost-cutting programs, resource recovery of any kind of ancillary stuff the team still sees. Do we want to bring it in? Can the infrastructure last? Debottlenecking, operational improvements, processing facility plans. Do we want to do any kind of life extension so we can keep that? And then usually they are discussing their decommissioning philosophy. So very different frame, but again, it's just field planning. The final one I think I'm ending here with is field development planning in the appraise to develop stage. So this happens quite a lot. We don't always move from stage 1 and go into stage 2 with no more uncertainty. And so a lot of times you guys will have some discussion still around, we've had a discovery, should we do more appraisal, and what kind of appraisal? Are we looking at wells? Are we looking at seismic? Are we looking at running tests? And then if we are, is there neighboring exploration we want to do before we pick our concept? So I just wanted you guys to end with a view that framing is just framing. It's just framing decisions, and where and what kind of decisions you use these brainstorming and categorization and structuring techniques really is not just for field development planning, but for any kind of decision making we're supporting. And I think, so on this last one, I wanted to show you an example of a decision risk timeline. It is a step that can be helpful. It's taking each of those strategy alternatives or field development plan alternatives and structuring how would they play out in time. So this brings decisions and uncertainties together for the different options that your team has framed up from a different plan perspective. And it kind of puts high-level timing differences of when they're making their big investment decisions and when key uncertainties are playing out. So don't expect you to walk away fully knowledgeable in field and decision risk timelines, but they're actually quite helpful to help your teams kind of go, well, what do we really mean by this particular plan versus plan B versus plan C, before we would jump into a qualitative assessment and then which field development plans are worthy of the quantitative analysis. All righty, I think, Susan, that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed this. It's very much a useful tool, I believe, for technical people, but I'm very biased, so.
Fantastic. I want to remind our audience that you are muted, but you can ask questions in the Go to Webinar question feature. So if you want to type your questions now, we will go through them. Ellen, when you conduct a framing workshop, who do you invite to a framing workshop? How do you get this process started in a company that doesn't do this frequently?
So, I mean, it really is who has the relevant knowledge. So right when you're doing, the one step I didn't explain and define is you and the decision maker are kind of setting up the problem that needs to be solved, etc. But the other part of define, which is very important, is who has the relative knowledge to either make the decision maker needs to get alignment with X number of people, who might those be, and who has the relevant knowledge to frame up the options. So you don't need the whole team, but that's when we call that the governance. And it's very important to decide who does understand this particular field or analog fields, this particular types of technology that we might be considering. So that's where you're thinking of who to involve and who to invite. And then they're having these framing sessions with, it could be subject matter experts that aren't from the team as well. Sometimes it's even outside contractors or vendors who have specific knowledge. So it's who has the relevant knowledge, basically.
Great. And how do you avoid, I think it's human nature to anchor on one alternative, to feel like you already know what the answer is before you start this process. How do you avoid that anchoring bias?
So I don't know that we avoid it. I think the idea that we're going to look at alternatives. So when people come in very firm, I always say, we're not going to listen we're going to listen to what they're saying, not necessarily the intent too much on that. And I'll say, it sounds like you have a plan that you think is going to be good. Jot that down and let's make sure we bring your plan and in line and define that as a group. And then we'll talk about what are some others. So there's different ways you want to make sure everybody's heard. And then we're going to have a pros and cons discussion before we get to that qualitative assessment as well. So a lot of there's different ways to get the alternatives, but some people, once you get to that starter menu for your concept that you're looking at or your field development plan, sometimes I'll even, God forbid, like use paper, but pass out the menu and say, think a little bit to yourself or with one or two buddies, come up with one or two concept ideas, and now we're going to go around the room and share them, right? And then we'll start talking once we have them all defined. We have a basket of alternatives, and theirs is in there, their horse is in there. And then we'll talk about, as a group, top pros and cons, and then kind of qualitative assessment. what insights do we get, and would we really want to go run numbers on all of them, or are some of them, through our discussion, the ones that are really of interest, right? The other thing is, of course, I said this already, you know, we are the sun rises and sets with the decision makers. So the team is going to frame up the options. The team is going to meet with the decision makers and say, these are the different options we would recommend going and running some numbers to. Do you agree? And that's where the decision makers can go, you know, especially on that one that we all were just looking at, one of those LNG ones, that when they had their frame review, the team was not really looking at pipeline. And so one of the decision makers said, you know, I know that's not what we want to do, but I'd still like you guys to run numbers and compare these alternatives to that. So it's a very collaborative conversation, which doesn't keep people from anchoring, but it throws their horse into the race along with others. And I think that's kind of the goal. All right.
So you mentioned the acronym DIVA for the various strategies. Why should one strategy be interesting? What is the reason for including that?
More than so, one of my very favorite colleagues who's now retired, he was one of the EVPs at Conoco, Matt Fox, came up with the term DIVA. And really what we're trying to do is talk to you guys about, at the initial framing, let's have development concepts that are very different, right? Very different from each other, because we could frame up 20. We certainly don't want to go run numbers to 20, but we might want to run numbers to a few concepts that we think are viable, they're interesting enough to afford our time, and they're going to tell us directionally where the value gain and loss might be given different risks and uncertainties that these face. Remember, all sets of those field development plans face the same risk and uncertainty. So once we frame up our options, we're going to evaluate them given those risks and uncertainties. So the idea of saying divas is, the idea of the divas is they don't go and run numbers to just field development plans that are slightly different, slightly different, slightly different. We want them to run a few, I usually say 3 to 5. They're very different. We can see where value is created or destroyed. And then round 2, you can optimize around the parts of your field development plan that are truly compelling, right? So the interesting is they're interesting enough to afford our time, because post-framing, somebody's going to spend a decent amount of time from that team costing things out, scheduling things out, forecasting resource production, and we want it to be done thoughtfully. I guess that's the long answer, not the short answer.
So 20 strategies would be too many. 4 or 5 is better?
Well, you know, so I have this 3 to 5 because God knows we always have scope creep. Now, one of my colleagues and partners at Decision Frameworks years ago, he was doing a framing. So I was not there, but he was showing me the frame for the frame review, and the team had like 7, and I was like, Jeremy, I think that's a lot, you know, especially for most of this goes to 2 rounds of evaluation. You're going to evaluate the initial strategies and then get some insight and come up with some hybridization. So there's probably going to be 2 times you're running kind of all the economics. And he said, you know what, Ellen, I think so too, but here's the deal. This is the group of decision makers, and this guy, his favorite horse is this concept, and this gal, her favorite horse is this concept. And we're going to get through the initial evaluation, and I want to answer everybody's favorite horse. So his point was, with that set of decision makers, each one had a different horse they were going to have to look at and see the results of. And if we didn't, we weren't keeping it from happening. We were just dragging out the evaluation. So he had good reason. I would say 3 to 5 to keep the scope from being crazy. I'm going to pull a dog here in a moment. Alrighty.
Gotta love the dogs when we're working from home. So you mentioned hybrid. Sometimes your 2 strategies coalesce to become a hybrid strategy.
So if you think about it, what really ends up happening, if you think of it, phase one evaluation, phase two, the phase one development plans are different enough to be interesting and worthy of our time. That's the first thing. What happens when we run the evaluation, and of course, because you're talking to me, with risk and uncertainty kind of incorporate either through formal sensitivities or probabilistically. What happens is the team will see which elements of their development concept are destroying value and which ones are creating value. And that usually means you bring the team back together and go, here's the results of these 3 or 4 very different development concepts. And let's see if some hybrid. So usually it's kind of elements that we go, okay, if this much gas really is coming in, tell ourselves with a tieback. So maybe we want to have a phase here, or maybe we want to do one more appraisal well, or kind of an inference test. So the hybrids come from seeing where value is created and destroyed from your initial strategies. And I could almost bet you're always going to go to a phase 2. And remember,
Excellent.
other weird things going on, like even though we had that big concept strategy table, each discipline is kind of grabbing their stuff. So you'll see the well guys and gals doing their own evaluation of, vertical versus horizontal versus how slanted can we go, especially with any difficulties with weapons and things like that. So a lot of little mini evaluations are probably feeding that full development concept framing evaluation as well.
And I noticed on some of your strategy tables, some of the strategies didn't end up following on some of the
And they don't always choose,
tactics.
right?
They don't always match up.
Yeah, so the deal is your strategy table is just a menu of options. So the team can say, we thought of these, but they don't always test every single one of them. The idea of the strategy table came from the decision science or behavior folks across the world in the different universities. And the idea of a strategy table was really so you don't run every single number, right? You don't run every single combination of field development plan. We put together some logical sets, forecast our costs and our resource recovery and our economics for those, see value, gain or loss, and then come back. So really, we just wanted to say that we've looked at a menu of options and we've chosen the options that we think from a planning standpoint make sense, right? There's certain things we would or wouldn't do.
Right.
So we don't have to use everything. And you'll see sometimes every concept always chooses something. And so if I was the facilitator, the decision facilitator, I might say, are we saying that decision's made? Are we saying it's a given? We're always going to send gas to region A. And someone might go, yeah, pretty much. We can go run numbers to the other regions, but this is where our transportation.
We would never do that. Right.
Right. We would never do those. Those will do those.
Excellent.
All righty.
Well, thanks for this presentation today, and we want to thank our webinar attendees for joining us. Later today, you will receive a link to a recording of today's webinar, an evaluation form, and a link to register for the 2 courses that we mentioned, Introduction to Decision Framing for Project Management, which is scheduled for January 28th, and Justifying Data Value of Information course scheduled for February 18th, both in Houston, Texas, next year. Thanks for joining us today.
All righty. Thank you, guys.
Goodbye.